forces of the light, the forces of kindness, they are stronger than all the forces that tell you to stop, to quit, to give up, to not dream, to not try.
It's not every day that we get to sit down with a powerful force for good.
There's a real courage in being generous.
So many people in that scenario would have been crushed, paralyzed. What is it about you?
Yeah, I was a boxer,
There
you
you
know,
go.
and I think
So you have the fight.
I have a fight.
She's also a living blueprint for what companies can do to maximize business success and create more human success.
I understood the assignment. I know what we're supposed to do here.
I am so pumped right now.
And then we listen to a podcast and it shatters everything.
Dr. Kimberly McGlonn is an award-winning business leader who is bringing us a call to action. So we're very excited to have her in studio, Kimberly.
Thank you for having me.
I want to talk a little bit about Grant Boulevard first.
Yeah,
So that's named after the street where you grew up.
it is first company.
Could you share how your family's journey on Grant Boulevard sort of shaped who you are today?
There's so much about that contributes to the DNA, the fabric of who we are, that lives in the stories of our parents and what they did and what they didn't do and how they won and how they lost. And that story of Grant Boulevard is very much so that for me. They made it into the middle class. They got postal worker jobs. They were federal employees. The first half of that, my parents were really stable and really present, and they worked a lot. You know, they opened up a small business, a restaurant, a delicatessen, and so they were present, but they were busy. And then they just collapsed, you know, like I think that midlife crisis can be really, really challenging. This notion of like, who am I and what have I done with my life and what do I want to do with my life? And that can provoke lots of anxiety and sadness. And that really crippled my mother, I think, looking back on it. And so she ended up leaving us when I was about 13, 14. And that changed the nature of everything.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like when you have a 2-parent household and one parent leaves or dies, then it becomes, how do you hold the middle? And my dad really tried hard to do that, but that pressure created its own sadness and anxiety for him. And he settled into some really unhealthy coping mechanisms. And so by the time I was solidly 14, I was just figuring out how to feed myself and how to get myself to school and how to get my permission slip signed. And it just, everything changed. Everything just changed.
Wow.
How long did that last for you?
My dad dropped me off at college at 18. I saw him then. I spent most of my holidays in friends' homes around the South. And I saw my mother again when I was 21. It was the next, I saw
From
her.
14 to 21?
I saw her maybe twice.
You saw her twice.
Yeah, maybe twice, maybe 3 times. I figured out what a lot of us have to learn eventually, which is who do we want to be? And are we going to sit at the wall of loneliness, or are we gonna keep figuring out how to just take one step up it? And that's what I really worked on doing.
It's amazing, but 14 is so young. Did you have somebody else who came and helped occasionally?
I'd meet with my English teacher and she'd say this, and I'd meet with my guidance counselor and she'd say that, and so my school community was really. I became a teacher, and in large part I always had beautiful experiences with lots of really warm, affirming teachers. And so the teachers in my life, they really saved me. They really, 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 really saved me.
You ever think about what your life would have been like had you not gone to college?
Dancing, which is adjacent to sex work, I would have probably done what the girls that I knew who were attractive and who were, you know, who were just like trying to figure it out. That was the next other way, right? So at 16, 17, 18, I was working 1 or 2 jobs always. I always had at least 1 job. Oftentimes I had 2 jobs. Wow. And there was a season in that when I turned 18 where I was like, maybe dancing, maybe, you know, I didn't think explicitly about sex work, but I calculated that might have been something that would have eventually been made attractive to me.
Yeah, there's lots of money involved in that.
Yeah, there's lots of money involved in that might have been the way that it would have played out.
What is it about you, Kimberly, that just came through? Because so many people in that scenario would have been crushed, paralyzed, wouldn't even know what to do. Yeah. What is it about you?
I think it probably exists. I haven't thought about this in that way, but it probably exists in a trifecta of like truths. One truth was those women. Was those like all of those strangers, those non-biological figures who were really very fiercely clear that there was another path for me. It was like I was cornered.
You had to.
I had to. I was cornered
by this. They
believed
in you.
They were like a wall of like, we are standing right here and we're funneling you into college.
I love that.
Yeah. I think because I was a kid who loved reading, there were always, in my mind, there were always options. There was always an adventure to be had.
Wow.
So I always had a spirit of like, of wonder. And I think that was helpful. And I would be really remiss to not say that for me, and my language is God, that there was that God, my creator, the creator, this force of light in the face of incredible odds, we always held some kind of relationship. That benevolent force always held me. I think for me now, as a classroom teacher, I taught world literature. So I taught about the Old Testament, the New Testament, and Buddhism and Confucius. I mean, we really traveled the whole world. I love that class,
by the way. Philosophy of religion is one of my favorite classes.
Yeah, it's a fun one. And I think for me, in this moment, I'm really most interested in theologies that are anchored in a spirit of generosity.
Right.
Like there's a real courage in being generous, because it suggests that I don't have to be so nervous about my own well-being that it means I have to be cruel. And I think that where I find those traditions that say that I am made richer, I'm made stronger, I'm made more confident, I'm made more beautiful in really thinking about how to think about other people and making myself small, that has carried me through every single storm of my life.
Oh my gosh, it's got chills on my arm.
Without any one of those three forces of good in your life, it would seem that you wouldn't be here today. No,
I probably would have. I mean, who knows? I mean, I've had friends who've completed suicide. People, women who were in their early 20s who just were broken. A lot of grace.
Yeah,
a lot of grace.
But I mean, to Stacey's point, there's something in you.
Yes.
Right? You should probably give yourself that grace as
well,
right? I
will. My dad was a boxer, and I think
so you have a fight.
I have a fight. Yeah, my dad was a boxer, and he was always a feminist, and he was always really, really clear that he wanted me and my sisters to think of ourselves as fighters, and that we were going to show up, and sometimes that meant we were going to take something on the chin, and we were going to punch back. And so that's always been a part of my energy in every room I walk in. I don't lead with the spirit of fight necessarily, but I think it's really important that it's also a part of the energy that I walk in with, that I'm a warrior, and that means that I'm not afraid of a confrontation. Right. For humans who've just survived being abused, that's a natural default. Mm-hmm. And while my parents struggled with personal crises, they weren't necessarily abusive to me, right? They weren't gone. Yeah. And in that way, that meant that there were certainly years where I was emotionally neglected. They weren't cruel to me. They weren't, and I never saw their struggles as an act of attack on me. Right. I saw them as I saw their sadness.
So many people would be like, well, my parents were like this, obviously turned out this way because of something that happened to me, but that was never going to be you.
No, and that doesn't mean like I haven't struggled with anxiety.
Right.
It doesn't mean that I never experienced heartbreak. It doesn't mean that I never felt grief of wondering, like, or wanting more than wondering. Wanting them to be able at different stages of my life to be more involved.
Yeah.
And then it became like, in order to do the next thing I need to do, I can't wallow. Like there isn't enough time to wallow. Sadness can be crippling.
Oh yeah.
And it just, for me, it was just like, I'm going to push. I want to keep pushing and pushing. And sometimes that made me an overachiever or a hyperachiever.
Right.
Sometimes that made me really, really hyper rational. Sometimes that made me really kind of controlling. And it also meant that I was like committed to 9 years of therapy, and I traveled to like 25 countries. And I really was just like, how do I continue to expand my notion of what's possible? And business just became another way of a canvas for distilling all of those lessons into trying to figure out how to build something that still lived in that spirit of inclusivity and radical tenderness, particularly for other women.
So tell me about your businesses.
I was an English teacher for 20 years. And about year 15, I started thinking about, was this really the only thing I wanted to do?
Right.
I met a lot of teachers, colleagues who love that being in high school. And I was just like, at some point I would really like to graduate maybe. So I took a sabbatical and I traveled by myself. First major solo trip to East Africa. I went to Kenya. I wanted to work with women and nonprofits who are supporting deeply impoverished people. So I did that and came back home. And so I watched a documentary called 13th, which is still on Netflix. Mm-hmm. And it really is a great primer on understanding the story of American institutional development in the last 250 years through the lens of how we define what it means to be criminal and the 13th Amendment to the Constitution in particular. And that really just made me think, like I really love being in this classroom, and I love teaching about the world, and I love teaching about marginalization in the American story and the ways in which that's created challenges for even for us to preserve our democracy. But I thought I really just wanted to show up differently. And so I started thinking about people who'd come home from prison, particularly women, the fastest group of incarcerated people in the country, and how hard it is for people once they get, we've all broken the law. I also never walked through the world presuming that I was better than people who had been arrested or convicted or charged, because I knew I'd broken the law. And that like radical sense of self, I think, made it easier for me to be like, I don't even need to know what you did. If you are trying to do better, if you served your time and you're trying to get it, right that ship, then we all need teachers who say, I'm going to try my best to funnel you into a new way of thinking about what's possible. And so my teaching practice just expanded into business as a new classroom. So Grant Boulevard was founded in 2017, and it was thinking about, could I build a brand that sought to hold in balance the needs of really, really vulnerable people with tender care by providing them a living wage? And could I do that in a way from a material strategy that didn't ignore my understanding that our planet is in a state of peril? So we set up to do that, to think about fabrics and processes and design procedures that would just really be radically intersectional, because time is short. The things that all of us, whether we have the deep science or we've read the history, we have a feeling that there is something that's like really, really off. And we're all trying to figure out what that solution will be. Mm-hmm. But my research and my travel has really made it very clear that it's not one solution. It's like we need to everybody's got to get to the front line with the most empathy that we can kind of rally around for our kids, for our neighbors. And we have to design things that pursue profit, because profit is important for growth and experimentation, but don't do it in a way that continue to exacerbate the deep class gaps that we have and the significant environmental issues that we're all struggling with. I really looked at pioneers in other industries, what Todd Carmichael had done in building La Colombe, the coffee brand, and what Patagonia had done in thinking about, what it meant to think about the planet. And then I just said, the things that call to me, the things that I'm aware of, they're inspired by my own, to some extent, my own pain, by that experience of my childhood. That's where I'm supposed to be. And to go back to those places, which I think is the highest call for all of us, oftentimes it means we're going to take resources and insights that other people may have, but not with the same thinking about what the way forward might be. I always saw myself as a stylish woman. Like, I always loved the idea of like, kind of walking in and feeling like I understood the assignment,
right,
in a space. I know what we're supposed to do here. But I really didn't think about, I wasn't a fashion student. It's interesting now I teach in a school of design, in a fashion school of design, but I didn't go to school for fashion design. I loved thrifting.
Yeah,
I loved
you had said your mom took you thrifting, and she was like, find your style.
Yeah, and I love that idea. I love the idea of storytelling for always. But I didn't look at fashion as like this longer legacy of like Versace in 1999.
right.
Did that was never my... It just didn't do it for me. For me, I've always thought about everything I do is like, how does it land itself in a longer legacy arc of really trying to be generous with my time and my talents and my treasure? And that just hasn't changed.
So fast fashion has to stand completely opposed to what you do.
It does.
What you believe.
It does.
Nothing sustainable about fast fashion.
Nothing sustainable about fast fashion. Yeah. No, mass
Nothing
production.
Environmentally conscious about fast fashion.
For those people who don't know what fast fashion is,
let's get into it.
What are we talking?
Fast fashion is a way of describing the speed with which the garment industry moves, and the two major pillars that are required to move at that lightning speed. One of them is this encouraging of like voracious consumption. The model of taking workers who are children and who are women and not paying them to keep costs really low, instead investing in marketing stories. It has all of these other environmental fallouts of this idea of saying to people, you're never enough. You can't buy enough to be happy. So it's going to be something that you're going to have to keep thirsting after. Fast fashion was never going to be something that would be a place where I would be comfortable. The antithesis of fast fashion is slow fashion. It's the story of craft. It's the story of what is valued in places like France, like Scandinavia, like Japan, which is this idea that the things that people make with their hands, that they are uniquely valuable. And because of how special they are, I want to feed you for something that brings you deep joy and that you are uniquely talented in. Right. And because that pursuit for you is valuable to me, I want to honor what you can do that I can't do. And that's how I affirm that you have value. Yeah. And then it becomes an ecosystem where that's what we do. You know, I want to see you do the thing and build the thing that you love. And I want to do that too. And I want to give that to you. And then you give it to me. And then we give it to her and she gives it to them.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's the putting the people ahead of profit.
That's right.
That.
That's right. And in that way, we have enough because you're going to charge me something that's fair and I'm going to pay it. Right. Right. Like this is the ideal. And because I trust you and I value you, I'm going to pay it. And in this way, it's not just that we have enough to eat, but we have the real sense of purpose. Because the thing that you build is something that is tied to something that feels unique for why you exist. Right. And I find joy in seeing that come to life. Right? Mm-hmm.
It's hard to scale, right?
It is hard to scale. And that's why I think the other conversation is, why are we so insistent on this notion of scale? Why are we so seduced by this standard definition of what scale means? Right? Why can't scale mean that instead of having 5 million customers, I have 5,000 customers, and those 5,000 customers they're not just dating every ad that comes to them. They're married to me. They're married to my craft. They're married to the relationship that they have with me, and that there's a loyalty there. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that we've lost in this pursuit of scale is loyalty.
So how can someone out there support fast fashion, but can support what you're trying to achieve here with
this one radical shift?
Radical shift. Yeah. Because this is my first, sort of entree into it. Yeah. I'm old. I'm imagining a lot of people just aren't aware that they are perpetuating fast fashion.
Yeah, we're not, because we're not supposed to know.
Yeah, that's well put.
We're
not supposed to know. So, it's, and then we listen to a podcast and it shatters everything.
Let's everybody.
There are a couple of things that we can do. I mean, one of them is like, so much of it is like the due diligence that we're supposed to do when we look for interest rates for our homes, or when we think about who we're going to marry or go into business with. We have to think about consumption with that same level of due diligence. Like, is there a way that you can buy less in general? And when you do buy, can you invest it with companies where you've researched the founder? Be curious about craft. Try to get to know crafters, get furniture makers and jewelry makers and hat makers. And there are all of these people who spend so much time learning something and perfecting it. Support them. I think beyond that, think about thrift. They say there's enough garments for 6 generations that already exist. Really? If we never made anything else.
Oh my gosh.
We had nothing else was ever made.
But nobody wants to buy outside of new.
Right.
They end up throwing out stuff at Goodwill. Like they don't have anywhere to give.
That's right. So I would say slow down your consumption generally. Think about how you can think about craft. When you're going to buy, try to avoid new. And I would also say, there's so many other ways to do it. Swap. You get your girlfriends together and be like, hey, I just lost 15 pounds. You're up 15. And swap.
Sure, that would go over well.
Wait, so
I mean, this is radical. This is radical, community.
I have 1,000 questions, but I want to talk about the book. Yes, I want to get it out there.
It was a lot of these conversations. As I was talking about how I thought about business, I thought that one of the things that was missing from a lot of MBA programs was that there isn't a whole lot of guidance for how do we think about things differently. Not even just the doing, just the conceptual thinking about how do we see what is and then think yet differently about what might be. And so this book really was born of that. It was like, what if I offered a book that was, 70%, this is how you actually execute on improving your business in better alignment with your own sense of life's purpose, which is deeply personal. And in doing that, how do you discover that your business can think differently about people and the planet, and the reality that it must. The first 30% is just like, hey, I'm a girl from the north side of Milwaukee, and this is what that taught me. And I hope that people leverage that story to understand their own stories, why they say yes when they want to say no, why they say no when they should say yes. Why haven't they taken that trip? Why haven't they taken that risk? What are those blocks that set their compass in the world? And then how do they leverage that self-awareness to continue to build things that really produce just a life well lived?
You're a standing, living example of someone who was that. And everything you just said about how far you've come and you get to experience life in all different ways. What are you saying to them? Aside from like, hey, don't give up.
I want them to know that the forces of good, the forces of the light, the forces of kindness, of the spirit of endurance, the spirit of adventure and possibility, they are stronger than all the forces that tell you to stop, to quit, to give up, to not dream, to not try. They have to first, I want them to accept, I want them to choose that. That core belief that the light, that the spirit of what is good is going to win. And that spirit is rooting for them. So even when they feel profoundly alone and confused, that's a fleeting feeling, because ultimately there's another force that wants to see their success. I want them to see that everything that they go through, all the things that have made them feel small, that have told them to wilt, that have told them to be afraid, that those emotions are very valid, but they have to sit with them and see what they've come to teach, and then let them leave. Because sadness is going to come. And sadness comes to teach us something. Anxiety comes to teach us something. Jealousy comes to teach us what we might want for ourselves. And I want that 14 or 15, 16-year-old to know that all of those lessons are ripening in them to show up as yet another force of good. That those lessons show you where you're supposed to turn your gaze, and where you're supposed to really to do something that is powerful. It doesn't come to cripple you.
Right.
It comes to give you a superpower.
That's great.
And all that suffering, all of that sadness, all that loneliness, all of that feeling like, I didn't know what to do. It's given me such wide arms to hold people much physically bigger than me when they're feeling that same way. And from a very sturdy place of survival, of optimism. And that's the last thing I would like to tell that 15, 16-year-old is to protect your optimism, because those dark forces are going to tell you to quit. They're going to tell you to give up. Yeah. They're going to tell you to not go. And if you really hold out your optimism as a shield, and you carry that shield with you through life, it will protect you when you really feel like you're under deep assault and attack from forces that tell you that you're not enough, that it's never going to work out, and that you won't win. So you have to fight, right? Going back to the idea of being a fighter. And part of that toolkit is that shield of optimism.
That's very well said.
Awesome. The book is called Build It Boldly. So what is being bold?
It's really, I think it starts with being really radically honest about all the things that you are. And I'm learning that the more radically honest we are about all the things that we are and all the people that we've been, it opens up these pathways for connecting with other people and of being of service to other people. So, if you are that 65-year-old, if you can say to yourself, I am a multiplicity of things, and I've been a multiplicity of things, it makes you a stronger leader. It means that all the people who come in to work with you or work for you, it gives you another way of connecting with them. And the most remarkable leaders are people who have they're just octopuses of portals. They can say I've been poor. They can say I've made a mistake. They can say I've been wrong. They can say I've questioned my identity. I've questioned my sexuality. I've questioned my future. I've questioned my past. I've questioned my failings. And that means as they're leading, people feel safe. So the boldest thing we can do, it has nothing to do first with anyone else. It's boldly seeing yourself, holding radical compassion for yourself, holding kindness for yourself. When you cultivate that, when the voice in your head isn't critical and hard and demoralizing and mean, when you can examine, how do I talk to myself? Did I get that? Is that the sound of my mother? Is that the sound of my father? Is that my grandfather who's like comes and haunts me and makes me feel ashamed? If we can really work with that, it will make us more compassionate neighbors, more compassionate parents, leaders, voters. It'll make us better able to do what's in the best interest of the common good. And that's a very personal quest. And when I meet people who are unable to do that, it's really, I think oftentimes their 14 and 15-year-old selves where they really haven't dealt with how cruelly they were treated by people who should have treated them with kindness. And so they're moving with that same sense of resentment and vengefulness because they haven't really learned how to be tender with themselves.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm happy I introed you as a powerful force for good because you clearly are that in everything that you've said here today.
Thank you so much.
This has been great.
It's been great. I hope that your listeners, that they pick up the book. I feel like I've been told it's beautifully written. I've been told that it's really well paced. It's not a massive book. The goal was that a ninth grader would pick it up and not feel discouraged by it.
Right. And
that there's every chapter ends with some key takeaways, and there's a workbook that's available on my website if you're really interested in continuing to think about some of these big questions about how our businesses have to be informed by our identities.
I love it.
Amazing.
It's good stuff.
And what's next for you?
Yeah.
Where are you going to go, and how can we help you get there?
Yeah, well, I love meeting new people. So please, those of you who are listening, follow me at Kimberly McGlonn on Instagram. You can head over to my website, drkimberlymcglonn.com. There's a book tour that's happening. So if you follow along there, you'll see where I'm showing up in real life. So that's the idea, is how do we just continue to, in a time where people feel really afraid and really anxious, how do we continue to recognize that even as things burn, it gives us fresh soil for new plantings. And so let's think about what we're gonna plant, what we're gonna put in this garden of this country.
Fantastic. What a great way to start the day.
Amazing.
It's been great.
Yeah.
I am so pumped right now.
This is awesome. Thank you so much for
You're
coming
very
on the show.
welcome.
We really
Very
appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr.
It's been
Kimberly
great.
McGlonn. Thank you.
And thank you guys for watching. We'll see you real soon.